All right, let's go ahead and get started. Well, thank you all for joining and welcome to session 2. This is the final session of the New Year, New Mind seminar that I put together. Many of you were at the first session, some of you were not. So basically, these sessions are just really my opportunity to do something I'm very passionate about, talk about psychology, talk about leadership, talk about social science and social behavior, the processes within the brain, and everything that I care about talking about. And my real passion within this field is helping people transform their lives. So if nobody was able to take at least one thing that I've said throughout these 2 seminars and apply it to their lives, I would feel like I failed in what I was doing. And fortunately, I've heard from some people that they really liked what I said last week. So that gave me some encouragement. Thank you. That gave me some encouragement to keep going. So let's start with a bit of a recap. Last week, we talked about habit formation. We found that it takes about 84 days to formulate a solid habit. We found that the brain is striving for something known as automaticity, which is when it can basically do things on autopilot. We found that you have to be very intentional with what you are doing by linking outcomes to specific behaviors. If you want to formulate a good habit, you need to come up with a very specific plan of what you're going to do, a situational cue that prompts you to do that thing, and you have to be consistent in doing it. We also talked a bit about worldview and perspectives. We found that there are 6 different types of explanatory styles that you can apply to any social situation, and the application of those styles really determines the outcome and how you appraise the specific situation. We talked a bit about appraisal in general. We talked a little bit about trauma, which was not in my notes, but a question was asked in which I was able to expand upon the idea that it really is just the appraisal of a situation that determines what your specific response is going to be and how that memory is going to be encoded in your brain. And then we talked a bit about my favorite topic, which is winning, and we found that winning is not determined by the outcome, it's actually determined by the process to the outcome. Winning is determined by telling yourself that you're going to do something and then actually doing it, and that is the win. We found that you can rewire your brain to seek out winning in every single situation. We found that that is basically driven by a process in the brain in which dopamine is increased when we have some people at the door. Awesome. We found that dopamine is increased when you win. So basically rewiring your brain to seek out winning in certain situations or in every situation is what allows certain people to become winners in almost everything that they do, right? So today we're going to talk a bit about leadership, and we're going to talk about the self, our inner workings within ourselves that can make the difference between whether we're going to be an effective leader or if we're not going to be a leader at all. So before I start this talk in general, I like to tell people that regardless of what position you are, regardless of your title, regardless of any sort of status that you would have, you are a leader in anything that you do, right? At the very basic level, you're at least leading your own lives. But there are always people who are looking up to you. I had a really good conversation with a dear friend of mine in which he said, you never know which person is looking at you and looking at your life as an example. We go through lives oftentimes thinking about what it is that we're doing and where we're falling short and how we can, be better at certain things. And many people are going through life looking at us and saying, how can I be like that person, right? So at least on that level, everyone is a leader. So today we're going to talk about leadership, the self, and how we can take ourselves to the next level within leadership to become that person who really brings out the best in our followers. So, next slide, please. Okay, so the purpose of this is to really get a comprehensive overview of what the self actually is. What is it within us that makes up, within me, that makes up Micaiah Bell? Who is Micaiah Bell? Who is Micaiah Bell in certain situations? And how does this all come together to formulate me as a whole? Then we're going to talk a bit about leadership and how me and within these different constructs that I have within myself formulates who I am as a leader and how those 2 things are intertwined. Next slide, please. So this one's the timeline. Last time we had 4 things. This time we only have 2 things because these are very, very dense. And the study that I'm going to be pulling from, it was dense. It took me days to really get through it. And I'll be honest, I didn't even put everything from that study into this talk because it was so much. But I basically just took the best parts of it and gave you guys a presentation based on that. So we're going to start with an understanding of the self, and then we're going to talk about a leadership framework and how the self is applied within that. So, next slide, please. What is leadership? I can tell you what leadership isn't. It's not simply just telling people what to do, right? It's not saying, hey, do this, and then they go do it. That's more of a position. That's more of a status. But true leadership is the process of taking in information or experiences, internalizing it, and developing it into a deliverable that other people can take and essentially use. They can understand it, and they can internalize it themselves, right? So what does that mean? Because that just sounded like a bunch of word salad. Essentially, leadership is the process of taking something that you've gone through or something that you've learned, internalizing it, understanding it, really taking in that whole experience and saying, all right, what are the key things from that experience? How does this change me as a person? And then developing that into a deliverable, whether that deliverable is a speech, whether that deliverable is an action, whether that deliverable is something that you can do before others, or whether that deliverable is just how you act. But it has to be something that becomes apparent to where other people can look at you and see, this person is a very effective leader. This person has been through something, and they were able to actually internalize that and translate that into something that worked for someone else, right? So the greatest captains of the best football teams that I've been a part of were those who had played the game and who are also taking outside experiences and were able to internalize that and bring that experience to football. So in the drills that they did or in the way that they gave speeches, all of those things were based on the experiences that they had been through. And what separated a very good leader from somebody who was mediocre is the ability for the very good leader to have taken those experiences and transferred it into a deliverable, right? So many of the people on the football team had been through the same experiences. We all wake up, we all go to practice, we all go to lift. Many of us played in the games. Some of us were starters in the games. Not everybody was on the same level of leadership, right? So you can take two individuals who have the same statistics, who have the same experiences, who are the same caliber of player. One is a very efficient leader. The other one's not so good at leadership. And that's because one was able to internalize it and create a deliverable. So that's really what we're striving for when we want to become very effective leaders. All right. Next slide, please. So where does leadership begin? True leadership begins with an understanding of who you are as a person, an understanding of yourself at the most baseline level, right? So leadership in itself cannot be bought. It can't really be taken. It has to be earned through an understanding of the self, which then evokes transformation in others, right? This is why in monarchies, the number one time of contention in a king's rule is during the succession. When another king is taking over after the previous king, that's when all the attacks want to happen. That's when people try and usurp the throne. That's the number one time when these things happen, right? Why is that? It's because the person who is taking the throne has not yet earned his leadership, right? As king, he's had leadership as a prince, and hopefully up to that point, he has proven that he's a good leader. But if he's not, then he has to earn that leadership, right? And so that's really effective leadership. So you have two different types of leaders. Many of you will probably have heard about this before, especially within the corporate world. You have a transformational leader, and you have a transactional leader. A transactional leader is the person who just tells you what to do. That's typically the boss, right? They tell you, go do this, you do that. Transactional leadership is only effective to the extent that the leader has something that the follower/employee wants, right? So the employee wants what? Money, a paycheck. So in order for the boss to get the employee to do something, they have to incentivize them with the paycheck. Once the paycheck is gone, the leader loses all leverage, right? But transformational leadership is a lot different because transformational leadership comes from within. Those are the people that you work for, and although they are your boss, that's the person that you look at and you say, well, I really just want to be like that person. They set a phenomenal example. They are a great person to work with. Those people sometimes are not even in positions of power. It might just be a coworker who you look at and say, that's a really good leader. I want to be like that person. The way that they evoke themselves, the way they present themselves, the way that they speak, so forth and so on, is a type of person that I would want to be like. So what you should really strive for is to be a transformational leader, right? A transactional leader, it doesn't really work as much when it comes to incentivizing people to do things when you have very little amounts of leverage. But this is why people who can go into the corporate world and raise millions of dollars to do something even though having nothing but just a business plan. These are transformational people. These are people who can come in and win the room with who they are, with what they've done, by having internalized their experiences and created a deliverable. Next slide, please. So, there are two truths about the social self. I don't know, this slide might be a little small. Hope you guys can read it, but I'll explain it anyway. Number one, it's malleable. And number two, there are core components that persist across contexts, right? So when I came to this realization in undergrad, it was pretty profound for me because up to that time, I could look back on my life and I could realize that the person who I was at that point in time was not the same as the person that I was 5 years prior. And a lot of my social self had changed. And most of that had changed subconsciously. A lot of that was just based on experiences. However, I didn't realize that you could actually change aspects of your social self consciously. Had I known that, there were so many opportunities that I missed out on. There were so many opportunities to have grown as a leader, but I was unable to internalize these experiences and create a deliverable based off of it. Right? So coming to that realization was profound for me because there were a lot of areas that I felt my social self was lacking. And when I say my social self, I mean any situation that has to do with other people, even if other people are not directly involved, right? Say you're building a product, for example, and you're building it by yourself, that is still something that's social because it has to be sold to another person. So anything that has to do with other people, right? So when I realized, oh, well, you know what? There's these aspects that I don't feel satisfied in. However, I can just change them. It's almost like if you have a car and you're not very happy with how the car drives, and the engine's sputtering all the time and whatnot, and you're just hoping that it's going to be fine, and then somebody comes along and says, you know you can fix the car, right? All you have to do is lift the hood, look for the problem, and fix the problem, right? It's like when you take the car to the mechanic, he knows how to fix the car because he studies cars. Well, this is when I started studying psychology and realizing there are so many aspects of myself that I could change, and this will determine my outcome in life. This will determine if I get what I truly want out of a social situation. This will determine how successful I am in every endeavor of life that has to do with people, right? And number two is pretty important because most people don't realize that number two is really the baseline for changing number one. The core components persist across social contexts, right? So a core component for me, for example, to make this a bit more concrete, is I'm typically a very calm person. You won't see me very, very riled up. I rarely ever get very angry, or I rarely ever get extraordinarily excited. I'm typically baseline very calm. And that's how I am in most situations. Even in football games where I had to be very excited, I still like to keep a level of calmness in my excitement. And that's a core component of who I am as a person. If I try to go change that, there's going to be a lot of issues. There's going to be a lot of dissonance. We're going to talk a bit about cognitive dissonance as we go on later today. But there's going to be a lot of dissonance in between what I'm trying to present and what I truly know to be true about myself. So the number one step towards creating change in your social self is to first understand your core components that make up who you are. And those are the components that you really want to dig into and perfect rather than change. If you are a calm and collected person, be that calm and collected person. Somebody else is the ultra excited person. Let them be that person. Do what works for you, and then you change within what you actually want to see change, but not the core components. Next slide, please. So I have up here 3 different concepts within social psychology that we talk about. The first 2 are very important. The third one I just added just because I kind of like it. I like talking about it. So the first one is reflected self-appraisal, right? And it's the concept of how we perceive ourselves based on our assumptions of how others see us, which then influences our own behavior, right? So this one's very interesting because many people make these assumptions about how others see them despite having no evidence to back it up. I think that they're going to think a certain thing about me, and you don't realize that by thinking that or assuming that, that is determining how you act within a situation. So for example, let's say I'm going to go into a meeting, and I'm going in with the assumption that when I walk into a room, I'm a large male, 6'3", about 230 pounds. If I walk into a room and I make the assumption that they're going to think, oh, he must be a football player, he must be a jock, so therefore he must not be smart. Those are assumptions I've completely came up with. Objectively just made them up myself. And I walk into the room with that assumption in my head is going to determine how I act. So then I might act in one of two ways. I might be very timid and not willing to speak and very reticent, in which they might actually confirm my assumption. Oh, this guy must not be very smart. He's not speaking at all. Like, we came to him to get him to talk. He didn't have a word to say. Maybe he just wasn't that smart. Or number two, I might try and overexert my smartness and try and say more than I actually should, try and dominate the conversation and leave a bad impression amongst those people. They might be thinking, oh, well, this guy kind of talks too much, so maybe he's not that smart at all. Or maybe he's too smart. We actually don't want to be around him. He's talking way too much. He knows too much, right? So you have to understand that these assumptions that we make are certain things that may not actually be true, right? Which brings me to the second one, which is the working self-concept, which is the idea that we present ourselves as different people within different social settings, right? And so the most pronounced example of this, I think, in modern society is most certainly churches, right? You go into churches, people are very nice, they're very open, they're very friendly. That's the premise of church. That's the premise of Christianity, that all are called to come in. However, you meet some people outside of church, they might have completely different personalities, right? That's not to say that it's bad, but they might be a person who's very quiet. They just don't want to talk that much. However, on Sunday mornings, they feel this obligation to act like a very extroverted and joyful and excited person to talk. That may not be the case in their real life, right? Because working self-concept is something that applies in multiple social settings. I know for me, when I go into certain social settings where I know I'm going to have to put on a hat that I don't like to always wear, I'm aware of that, and I present myself as something that's going to get the task done. There are certain situations where I walk in, and I know that my objective is to network with people. Been to those events, networking events, have to ask questions, right? I don't like to do that much talking in total. You might think that I like to talk a lot because I'm up here to talk for an hour. But in most social settings, I don't talk that much. But when I go into those social settings, I become the kind of person who I need to be in order to get this objective done. This is my working self-concept at work, right? So understanding that there are different versions of our social self that we have to apply in certain situations. Last week, we talked a bit about the fundamental attribution error. And I didn't get to expound upon this, but my professor one time in undergrad gave a great example. He said, how many of you think that I am a very talkative person? And the whole class raised their hand, like, yeah, he's definitely talkative. And he said, you guys only see me when I'm paid to talk. So of course you think I'm a very talkative person, right? That's the fundamental attribution error, but going into his work as a professor, he knows that he has to be a very articulate person who speaks for a while and speaks very well. So people then make the assumption, oh, he must be the talker. But in reality, there might be other social situations which he's not very talkative, right? He's more reticent. And then finally, we have social comparison theory, which I think is personally pretty interesting. It's the idea that there are certain traits and qualities that can only be assessed in comparison to other people, right? So you can compare strength, right? How strong are you? Well, we can just go lift and find out. But certain things like moral uprightness, morality, honesty, those things, they say, must be compared in comparison to other people. How moral of a person are you? Well, I don't know. How moral are other people, right? A great Bible example is you can look at the Ten Commandments. Prior to that, well, how moral were people? I don't really know. God will say. Well, then the Ten Commandments come out, and now we have a list of things to compare to. Well, who else is living by these 10 Commandments? Let me compare myself to them. Let me compare myself to the commandments, right? So the social comparison theory talks about how we can compare ourselves to others to see where we are on the spectrum of how effective our traits are. Next slide. All right, so let's begin to talk a bit about leadership, the positive leadership mindset, and how the self influences leadership. So from now on, we're going to be talking from a study that came out of Princeton, Army West Point, Rutgers, and Akron in 2009, and it talks about leadership. And if there's one thing I know, at least about the military institutes, is that they are known for leadership. So anytime a study about leadership comes out of that place, I want to read it and trust it. And we're going to talk a lot about this idea of, quote, positive leadership. And what really is positive leadership? Well, it is the process, or it's really the ability for the person to bring in the right inner resources from themselves and apply them to a specific situation, right? The right inner resources being the positive aspects that you would need to then streamline your behavior into what is effective for you as a leader within that situation. That's going to make more sense as we go on. So the first thing we have to understand within leadership is this idea of the self. So the self is really a conglomerate of multiple selves within ourselves, known as self-constructs, which are based on experiences that are encoded within memory. Within those constructs, there are something known as self-aspects. And these are essentially positive or negative traits, right? So before I explain the example, because you'll see a chart on the next slide, which will make this easier, I'll just explain the last part. You have to understand the demand, right? So in order to meet organizational demand and positively influence followers, these constructs that you have within your conglomerate of yourself have to be both highly positive and possess a panoply of traits. So there has to be a long list of positive traits within each construct. Let's go to the next slide so I can make all this concrete. I don't know if you guys can see this laser pointer on this. I can't even really see it. But all of these, I'll just explain it using my hands and talk. So all of these, so this entire oval is the self. Let's say that this is Micaiah Bell. Within this oval, there are these squares that are all labeled: manager, mentor, colleague, leader, public speaker, so forth and so on. Those are self-constructs. So this is Micaiah within a specific situation, public speaker, for example, which is exactly what I'm doing right now. You have certain self-aspects, and those are the traits. So we see articulate, persuasive, dynamic, skillful, powerful. This is all from the study. I didn't make this myself. If I did, I wouldn't have put the athlete at the bottom part. But nonetheless, this is Micaiah Bell, for example, right? So basically, you have all of these different hats that you wear as a person depending on the situation, right? So there are some of these hats that I don't yet wear, right? Husband and father. These are hats that I don't have to wear yet. But there's public speaker, mentor, and there's athlete, for example. These different these different hats are some that I might have to wear all at once. Let's say I'm delivering a speech to a group of youth athletes. I'm now wearing 3 hats: public speaker, mentor, and athlete all in one. So in order to be an effective leader within this situation, before I go into the situation, I'm going to be pulling from a list of traits. And these traits essentially are defined by the memories that I have to back up these specific traits. So in the public speaker, articulate and persuasive, right? So when I go to deliver a speech, I'm pulling from memories that either confirm or deny whether I'm articulate and persuasive, right? So as we go, this is going to make more sense. At the bottom, you have negative self-aspects. So we have writer, we have athlete, fearful, uncoordinated, out of shape. That's under the athlete. Under writer, we have unimaginative, unmotivated, inexperienced, right? So when this individual, which I said is me, unfortunately, when I go to do something that's athletic, if I'm pulling from fearful, uncoordinated, and out of shape, and that's what I believe about myself, I'm not going to be very effective as a leader within the realm of athletic endeavor, right? Whereas if I'm pulling from one of these traits that's positive, manager, for example, I'm going to be pulling from memories that are confirming that I'm organized, that I'm a good planner, and I'm task-oriented, and that's going to make me an effective leader within that realm. So, next slide. So there are 5 domains that positive leadership impacts, right? We're going to really focus on 2 of these really deeply, but I want you to have all 5 of these. Number 1, it promotes personal well-being in the workplace, right? So it influences you to approach more leadership roles and develop your leadership skills. In doing so, you will be confirming these positive leadership traits about yourself and thus enhancing your experience within the workplace. Number 2, it increases the match of leadership skills, right? So your ability to match your skills as a leader to specific roles or specific demands of the role that you're in is going to be increased by positive leadership. Remember, positive leadership is this idea that the individual can pull from positive past memories at aka the right inner resources, in order to create a deliverable that meets the demands of the task. Number 3, it provides an organized mental model, which is known as the CAPS model. That's something that we're going to explain deeply. That's one of those. Number 4, it creates self-concordant behavior, another one we're going to explain a bit deeper, which allows you to close the gap between who you are and who you want to be, which is known as cognitive dissonance. So it allows you to lower your levels of cognitive dissonance. And number 5, it promotes positive group behavior. That's amongst your followers, right? So it increases positive organizational behaviors and development and performance of followers. So if you are a positive leader, a transformational leader, you're that person who can evoke certain actions out of a person, right? You can get that person to level up their game as a leader, as an employee, as a worker, so forth and so on. But I want to go back to self-concordant behavior. I read a study very recently that was extraordinarily interesting to me. It said, the key to long life is not necessarily in health or eating clean, although that does help a lot. It's not necessarily in fitness, although that does help a lot. It is really in reduction of chronic stress. Chronic stress being stress that persists over time, over an extended period of time. And they say that chronic stress is created by cognitive dissonance, by this difference between who you are and who you want to be. Cognitive dissonance is defined as when your actions don't align with your own self-beliefs, right? When you go against your own morality, you're experiencing cognitive dissonance. When you're performing an action and you're not performing up to what you know yourself to be, you're experiencing cognitive dissonance, right? So the reduction of cognitive dissonance is what reduces chronic stress. This is why you can see some CEOs will be in highly stressful positions for years and years at a time, yet you talk to them and they absolutely love it. They don't seem to be showing any signs of the stress wearing on them because their mental model has been so ingrained in which they can't see themselves living a different kind of life. They believe that the stress that they're undergoing is exactly who they want to be. Who they are is exactly who they want to be, right? So reaching that realm to where who you are is who you want to be, they're not just parallel, they're one and the same, is what creates this low level of chronic stress and thus allows people to live longer lives, right? And positive leadership is one of those things that allows you to close the gap of cognitive dissonance. So the next thing that we're going to focus on is the CAPS model. The CAPS model is the Cognitive Affective Processing System. And it's an automatic system within the brain. It's a system in which it pulls from memories to prime specific traits for an event, right? So we can go ahead and go straight to the next slide after that. This is essentially what the CAPS model looks like, right? So you'll face, in the top left, you'll see something called a situational cue, right? So situational cue, for me, was I knew I was going to give this speech. That cued me to prime a specific aspect of something in myself, which was the public speaker hat. Right? Remember, so this oval on the left side, that is the organization of self-constructs that we looked at earlier. So this primed my ability as a public speaker, which then activated my CAP system. So now I'm pulling from memories of me doing public speeches, and then that leads to my self-concordant behaviors. So now I'm either speaking with or against what I believe about myself, right? So I'm either speaking with confidence, I'm speaking articulately. If we're going based off of what was in that box, I'm either speaking persuasive, articulately, so forth and so on, or I'm not. So I'm either going to confirm or I'm not. There's a higher chance that you end up confirming it because your brain is pulling directly from memories, right? And then after that, on the far right, you have the positive follower effects. We'll get into that later. And then basically at the end of the event, all of this becomes confirmed and reinforces that into your brain, which then goes back into that self-construct that we had at the top right, or at the top left, right? Last week we talked a bit about reinforcement in the brain. Reinforcement is basically when your actions reinforce a certain belief that you have about yourself, right? So that's what happens, and that's what allows you to build those characteristics within your self-construct and build those self-aspects, right? So next slide, please. So why do these selves actually matter? We're going to talk about two things here, pluralism and unity. Pluralism is the amount of selves that you have within yourself, the amount of self-constructs that you have within yourself. So if I take the overarching umbrella of Micaiah Bell, I have quite a few selves, right? I have friend, I have brother, I have son, public speaker, I used to have student, don't have that anymore, I've graduated. I have athlete, which I still consider myself to be an athlete, although I'm not formally part of a team anymore, but that's one of them. So forth and so on. There are other things that I could list, right? And the complexity of these cells essentially is one of the most important things, right? And we talked last week about the ability we talked about global versus specific thinking, right? Does this only affect one specific aspect of my life, or does this affect multiple or all aspects of my life, right? And how well defined these self-constructs are and how many of them you have is really what allows you to filter out negative situations, right? You can see some people who are really good at filtering out negativity and continuing to perform well in all aspects of their life, even if one is taking a major hit, right? That's because their pluralism is so high. So they have so many different self-constructs, right? So if something is affecting me as an athlete, right, let's say I'm having a poor performance in a season, or I get an injury, that's not affecting me as a brother, as a friend, as a public speaker, as a writer, so forth and so on, because that's only affecting me as an athlete, and I'm only allowing it to affect me within that self-construct of athlete, right? Then we have unity, which has to do with the self-aspects. I'm sorry, I said self-aspects today. That only affects me within the self-construct of being an athlete. Then we have unity, which is about the self-aspects within the construct, right? So within athlete, I have all of these different aspects about myself, right? So we could say in shape, experienced, excited, so forth and so on, confident, right? And a long list of positive aspects within my athlete construct. And how coherent these are is the unification of it, right? So if these are all telling me a different story about myself, that's not very good for my output as an athlete. Well, who actually am I as an athlete? Like, which one of these traits is it? They all have to tell a unified story that is overwhelmingly positive, right? So let's look on the next slide at this again, right? So yet again, we have all of these different self-constructs, and within it, you can see, like under leader, for example, you can see all the different self-aspects. And essentially, all of these self-aspects are telling a unified story. They're motivating, they're visionary, they're empowering, they're trustworthy, and they're ethical. That's telling a unified story about this person as a leader. They don't have any contradictory self-aspects that they believe about themselves, right? So that allows their self-construct to be very clear. So those are the people who can walk into a room within a specific situation and know exactly who they are. Like, they know who they are within that situation. They're not worried about anything. They're not thinking contradictory thoughts about who they are or whether they're effective or not. They have these aspects that they pull from within this construct that allows them to be effective. We're going to skip the next slide and go to compartmentalization versus integration. So, compartmentalization and integration are two things that this is arguably one of the most important parts of this whole talk. So understanding how we manage ourselves under stress is what allows an effective leader to take on more leadership roles, because they're all very stressful. To do anything is stressful. To do anything in leadership is stressful. And when I say stress, I really mean cognitive load. Cognitive load is when your brain just essentially has to work hard, right? So for me to get up here and give a speech, I'm under cognitive load right now. So I have to speak, I have to know my notes, I have to know what I'm talking about so that the words can flow off my lips. If I get up here and I don't know what I'm talking about or haven't studied, I haven't prepared, I'm under cognitive load, it's very difficult for me to pull the information out and get it to you, right? So that's an example of cognitive load. Also in football, when I was playing in games, under immense cognitive load and physical load as well. If I didn't know the plays, there was no time to be thinking, oh, well, let me read. Oh, that's where I'm going. No, there's no time for that. You just have to know it, you're in there, and you got to get it done, right? All of these, this is why we drill things so much, because all of these actions have to happen automatically under cognitive load, right? So compartmentalization is when you have both positive and negative traits separated, and you're choosing to focus on the positive ones. So within the self-construct of public speaker, I could have positive and negative traits within there. However, it's more effective for them to be compartmentalized and for me to focus on the positive traits. So I'm going to choose to focus on articulate, persuasive, and confident stage presence, right? under that realm of, under that self-construct of public speaker. And that's compartmentalization. Whereas integration is when those things are mixed together. So under public speaker, I could have persuasive, articulate, lacking confidence, not well read. So I have two positive and two negative aspects. And the reason why that is so important is because under high levels of cognitive load, your brain is not going to have time to sift through. We can go to the next slide. Your brain is not going to have time to sift through what it should pull from memories and what it shouldn't. It's only going in there immediately, subconsciously. This process happens like this, right? So this is why certain people get very nervous to go speak, or they're scared to go do something, or they're scared to embark upon this endeavor, because they're pulling from memories within their self-construct that are based on aspects that are telling them that they should not be doing this, right? Last week we talked a bit about approach and withdrawal. We said that fear elicits withdrawal. When you're afraid of something, most people withdraw from that, right? Versus when that thing is exciting, it elicits approach, right? So within that self-construct, you have to make sure that you have filtered out the negative traits and you're focusing on the positive ones, right? So how do you actually do that? One of two ways. You either take the negative traits and reframe them as, okay, public speaker, articulate, persuasive, lacking confidence, not well read. I could reframe those to say, articulate, persuasive, building confidence, and learning more, right? So now, every opportunity that I get to do public speaking, I'm focusing on how I'm building my confidence as a public speaker, how I'm becoming more well-read in order to give more knowledge when I go speak, right? So by focusing on that, I'm no longer going to confirm the negative traits that I had prior, right? Remember we talked within the model that once the situation is over, that information becomes internalized and it then reinforces what you believe about yourself. So the beliefs you already had are the ones that are going to be confirmed when you are embarking upon a specific endeavor, right? Great. So next slide, please. So basically, within these positive self aspects, what they found is that leaders with highly schematic positive self aspects, a long list of traits, are the ones who are able to easily pull what they need for a situation, right? So an individual goes in, and let's say under public speaker, again, to continue with that example, under that construct of public speaker, let's say all I have is persuasive, right? I don't have any other aspect that I believe about myself. When I go to speak, it's going to be very hard for me to pull what I need if I don't need to be persuasive. Maybe I need to be inspiring. Maybe I need to be articulate to talk to a group of people. Maybe I need something else, right? And it's going to be difficult for me to pull that from inside if I don't have a long list of positive aspects that I can pull from that I would need for a specific situation, right? So they also talked a bit about the leader to follower relationship. And this one, essentially what makes this one interesting is that these leaders who have more complex self-constructs are able to inspire their followers to bring out certain traits in them that they might not have themselves but want to develop, right? So most people follow leaders not based on what they like about them per se, but based on what they want to achieve within themselves from that leader, right? So I look at a leader that I like because that person speaks very well and I want to speak like them. Or because that person performs very well and I want to perform like them. Or maybe there's some subconscious trait that that person has that I've been trying to get out of myself, to evoke out of myself, and it's not been working, and I'm following that leader based on that, right? So a positive leader who is able to bring out these things from other people, you have no clue what you'd end up bringing out from the people who are following you. Like I said earlier, you have no idea who's watching you at certain points in time, right? So leaders who have these complex self-constructs and a long list of self-aspects are able to pull this out of people at a more effective rate. And then, of course, we have practicing practically, which, if I have to bring this to a close, I have to tell people, you practice these things under low cognitive load, right? So leaders who can practice this, who can develop their self-constructs, have them clearly defined, who can develop their long list of positive self-aspects under levels of low cognitive stress are the ones who are able to rapidly increase in their leadership abilities. Those are the people who are able to take on more leadership roles at a rapid rate. Those are the ones who are able to just feel better about themselves in general, right? Who can walk into the room, feel confident about what they're doing. Now, all of this leadership talk is not about being in a leadership position, right? It's about feeling like a leader within the position that you're in, right? You should be the person that people look at and they say, oh, I want to be like that person. I want to talk about that person. You shouldn't be the person who has to talk about everything that you're doing. People should be able to just watch you and say, that is a very effective leader. They are very effective in what they do. They are very good at what they do, right? So, that is it. I know this one feels a bit shorter than it was last week, but that's what I have from this study. Like I said, I didn't put everything from the study because it was so dense that I couldn't really get it all into one presentation, and I wanted to leave some room for questions. But nonetheless, thank you all for joining for session 2. All right, so I'm open for any and all questions. Quiet crew today. We had a lot last week. I'll give it some time in case anyone's thinking. We have a microphone coming. Mm-hmm.
One of the things I know that I need to work on is when I'm up, my expression. You know, I know you talked about being nervous when you're up there. What are some of the things that you've done to kind of make sure that it doesn't show? I know, even though you know your material, how do you help calm yourself down and focus on your facial expression? How have you worked on that?
Yeah, so in terms of, I'll just call it stage presence in general, I was just having a conversation with my mother about this actually. And we were talking about stage presence and just the way that people portray their faces. And it's not been one that I've consciously focused on. However, I've just been one to, I would say, there's a good quote that says passion drives innovation. And because what I speak on, I'm very passionate about, or I find passion within it, or I find passion in just speaking in itself, I'm able to allow my facial expressions to live off of that passion, right? So how I present myself is very genuine to what I believe about myself as a speaker, to what I believe about the material that I'm presenting, and to what I believe about the situation that I'm in. That being said, I think people's dispositions are all very different, right? Some people, they have naturally serious faces, and some people, they have naturally very smiley faces. I don't think that it's something that is, again, it kind of comes back to what we talked about earlier about core components that persist amongst different contexts, right? There are certain practical things that I could say people could do, like practice smiling more, practice smiling when they talk. But at the end of the day, I think when it comes to speaking, you have the opportunity to speak, which therefore nullifies anything that's on your face. It gives you the opportunity for people to hear what you're saying and for them to essentially listen to what you have to say and say, oh, well, you know what? They're just a serious person, or they just look like a serious person. What they said was very good, or they're very happy about what they're doing. But, you know, in terms of practicality, I could say, yeah, just practice smiling when you go and speak. But for that one, there's not a secret sauce. There's no secret recipe I found for that, for stage presence. Next question.
Okay. Okay, this is from my mother. This was from like last week, and
Yeah.
this was the question that she was asking is, when a person never admit their faults, um, how did you say it? I'm sorry.
Don't want to admit their faults, but always blaming someone else.
So, you want me to expound upon like the psychology behind that? I could do that. Yeah.
Explain.
Okay.
Explain.
Yeah. So that's one that I've looked into quite a bit. I think that lack of accountability essentially stems from a lot of different fears. One, you have fear of responsibility, you have fear of being wrong, you have fear of being the person who messed things up, and you have fear of having to change. I think a lot of times it focuses on that fear of having to change. Well, if you did something wrong, you might actually have to change what you're doing. And many people don't like change. They don't like to be the person who has to work on themselves and look internally and say, well, maybe I am just a lazy person. Maybe I am somebody who just doesn't clean up after themselves. Maybe I am someone who just doesn't follow through, right? And coming to those discoveries are often a lot scarier than to just pawn it off as being someone else's fault, right? So to just pawn it off, it allows you to continue going through life with a protective lens around what's really going on. But the individuals who are able to accept responsibility are those who are actually able to exert more control over their futures, over their destiny, and who are able to end up where they want to be, right? So we talked last week about, I believe it's, is it internal versus external explanatory styles, right? And internal allowing individuals to perform better within academics and business. I believe that was the exact example. And the reason for that is because those people are able to accept their own faults, take responsibility, and thus have more control over the next situation in the sense that they are able to change their actions and do something different to have a different outcome. People who always look externally are unable to do that. They're unable to change their actions and thus lose control over their own lives. So I would warn against people who are who are often blaming others for their situations, and I would say that you just lose control of your own life if you continue to go down that path, because if everything is everyone else's fault, if everything negative is everyone else's fault, but somehow everything good is your own fault, one, that doesn't even make sense, you know? And two, you just lose control over the overwhelming amount of situations that can be negative. Many situations can be negative, and if you don't have control over that, we'll say it's at least 50%, you go through a situation you didn't want to be in, you lose half of your life, right, to just other people's decisions. And personally, I refuse to be the kind of person who loses all of his life because I didn't want to take any accountability or do something different in the future or change something about myself to prevent an outcome that I didn't want to happen.
Okay. So you were talking about the social self, right?
Yes.
And about the core components that we have that remain consistent. So I guess my question is, with dealing with youth and teens, they have experiences. So if you could give me an example of how you said internalize those experiences, like them being authentic and true to who they are, but what that would look like for them to identify those experiences to your point, to internalize and create. Does that make sense? Like, what would be an example of how I could kind of create something or have them understand that you are a unique individual. You have these, this social self that you want to keep. That's who you are. That's who you were created to be. But what would that look like them kind of coming up with their experiences, things that they go through, and I guess for them to start developing those leadership skills internally so they can feel good about this is who I am and this is who I want to present to my social self.
Yeah. Okay, so there was a speech that I gave. We did senior speeches before graduating from Harvard football, and it was a speech to the entire football team. All the seniors got to give it, and you basically just talked about whatever you wanted. And in my speech, I said that you have to find meaning in what you do. Otherwise, you go through life meaningless. Most situations don't have meaning, or most situations, they have a meaning that you don't want, that just is not conducive to what you're going through in life, right? You go through an experience that's tragic, or you lose something, or you lose someone. And oftentimes, the meaning for that is hidden, right? I was going through a struggle within sports, and I had to find my own meaning for that struggle, right? So that situation, by finding meaning in a situation, that was how I was able to internalize this experience of what I went through within football and create a deliverable, which is me being able to now talk about my story and the struggles within the story and ultimately how the story ended in my favor, right? And oftentimes, sometimes a story might not end in the favor of the individual in which they thought it was going to end like, right? I thought that my football journey was going to end in a different way than it actually ended. I actually had no plans of going overseas to play. However, when it was all said and done, I found meaning in so many different situations that now I've internalized those experiences and can present myself to other football players, especially ones who are younger than me, as a leader within the realm who has done specific things, who has been through the struggle, who has, had things ripped from him that he felt he deserved, who has gotten plenty of things that he did deserve, who has gotten some things that he just outright didn't deserve and God just blessed him, right? So the ability to find meaning in what it is that you're going through, and ideally, the way to find meaning is to be grounded in some sense of morality that gives you a moral compass that points north always, right? So if the moral compass is broken and it's always pointing to multiple different directions, and you're having to create your meaning off just pinpointing where the compass is at that one specific time, it's very difficult for you to find a meaning that's actually going to be useful going forward in life, that's going to be grounded in morality, and that's ultimately going to drive your life forward in success. So ultimately, yeah, just finding meaning, and that's how you are able to internalize a situation and create that deliverable. Yep.
Okay. The question is, what are some techniques to help an individual stop thinking that others are thinking negatively about them or feeling overwhelmed when they enter into rooms that are uncomfortable?
Yeah. You always have the really good questions. You hit me with one last week and I was stumped.
That's actually not my question. That was from somebody else. But I kind of want that question to be answered too, though. So that's a good one.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's a really good question. The number one thing that people forget about mental reframing is that how easy it is for you to think a negative thought, it's equally as easy to think a positive one, and equally as positive, right? If the negative thought is this high on the scale, you can equally think a positive thought that's this high or even higher, right? So if you're going into rooms with assumptions about what others think about you, make those assumptions positive, right? What positive traits and qualities and skills do you have that you bring to the table, and then assume that people think those things about you already, right? And that's able to instantly, I find for me, I can instantly break out of a mental spiral if I'm able to just focus on, okay, what am I actually good at? Let's focus on that. What do I like about myself, right? And if it's hard to find that, then I would say you have to go back and start searching yourself for who you truly are as a person, right? What are your self-constructs? What different hats do you wear throughout the day? All right, within those situations, how can you build your positive self aspects up, right? When I talk about psychology and I talk about mental reframing, it really is an around-the-clock process, right? It's something that happens in all situations, in all social situations, in all different settings, but it's something that you can work on at all different points of time, right? It's not like going out to a sports practice where you can only practice the sport when the rest of the team is there. It's something that you can work on at all different points of time. And it really starts with going back to try and understand yourself, right? Going back to try and understand these different constructs, build the aspects within it. And then when you're faced with a situation that's going to be under high cognitive load, because anxiety is something that is characterized by high cognitive load, which is also characterized by high arousal and high uncertainty. Arousal meaning your senses are very heightened, and high uncertainty meaning you don't know what the outcome is going to be. That typically results in anxiety. That's how they've characterized it within the study of emotions. So with that being the case, since the situation is uncertain, make it certainly positive, right? Think about it as certainly positive. And then that is then going to dictate your behavior within the situation. So now you're going to act in accordance to what you're assuming about the situation and about the people thinking about you within the situation. So it really starts with that mental reframing and just thinking about that before you go in.
Okay. Now this one is, I want to know, how can leaders integrate faith, leadership, emotions, and identity without burning out, especially for someone who's stepping into a new leadership role?
How can leaders integrate faith, identity,
Emotions,
emotions,
and leadership.
and leadership? Well, that's pretty all-encompassing. I would say we'll start with the point of faith. There are so many leaders to pull from within the Bible. And it's always fun. I mean, it's fun for me because I love psychology to take a psychological approach to the text and see, well, I wonder what this person was thinking. Based on their lived experiences, it kind of makes sense that they would act in this specific way. Or like, why would they ask these questions or pray these specific prayers and whatnot? But within that, when you talk about faith, I mean, we're talking about a faith in which Jesus Christ is the greatest leader the world has ever seen. Reset the calendar. It's the largest religion on the planet. It has done tremendous things in people's lives, right? So when you want to integrate all of those things without burning out, the only way to truly not burn out is when we talked about cognitive dissonance earlier. We talked about when who you are and who you want to be are intertwined. You truly only burn out when who you are and who you want to be are not intertwined, right? Because now you're living in this gray area, you're under immense cognitive stress, and being within cognitive dissonance is draining by itself. So it's not actually the actions. This is why you can see people who have played, let's say the NFL, for example, brutal sport, played in the NFL for 15 plus years and wish they could go back. Their body just physically can't handle it. Never burnt out in the sport because who they are within that sport is exactly who they want to be. We see people who have, Pastor Bell, pastoring for 26 years. Many pastors don't pastor that long. A lot of them burn out. But who he is as a pastor is exactly who he wants to be. So it's not tiresome for him. He doesn't burn out from it. That's not to say that you won't get tired within a journey, and this is expanded to any journey, right? Outside of even just somebody who's being a minister and whatnot, or within a very heavily faith-driven role. But just in general, you have to become the person that you actually want to be, right? So if you're stepping into a leadership role within faith, within ministry, so forth and so on, who do you want to be, right? But there's a second part to that, which is who is God calling you to be, right? And if who God's calling you to be and who you want to be and who you are, now you have three aspects, and none of those are aligned, you're burning out very, very quickly. So if you can combine all three of those, align who you want to be with who God's calling you to be, with your actual actions of who you are, now you're in really good shape. Now there's nothing that can really rattle you. You have a really good foundation, and you're able to go without burning out.
You had said something earlier about, I kind of thought about like CEOs who like to work under that kind of stressful, because that's where they see their life being. What do you say to the followers that are below them that are living in that same stress, but they're not, maybe that's not the vision for themselves? How do you help that team, or how do you help that follower lead under somebody else's vision?
That's a really good question. Yeah, give me a second to think about that. That's very good. Yeah. Okay, so I would say like this to begin, and then we'll see where the answer goes as I think about it. Most jobs are pretty abstract in concept. You show up, you do an assignment, you get paid. The ability to think within the abstract it's almost like a superpower, right? If you can view work as something that's abstract that you're doing and focus on abstract qualities of work, right? Like, who am I as a worker? Let's start there. Do I show up on time? I'm proud because I just show up on time. I'm proud because I do my assignment and I do it very well. I'm proud because I do everything to the best of my ability. And the more time you spend focusing on that rather than the actual work that you do, is the better off you are as a worker in general, right? So that's just the baseline from the work side. As far as leading under someone else's vision, when we talk about positive leadership, this transformational leadership, that is more, so when it comes to vision, that is more on the transactional side of leadership. You set the corporate vision, this is what the company's doing, this is the direction we're going, this is what we're selling, these are the KPIs, so forth and so on. That's more transactional. Those things are pretty static, they've been set. Within that, you have how you actually approach these tasks, right? So if you are a worker under this corporate vision, The goal is to become a transformational leader, somebody who leads in what they do and how you do it, right? So leading under someone else's vision is more so about being the person who effectively accomplishes that vision in what you do, right? Being the person who's proud to show up, who shows up on time, like I've been saying, and does their work to the best of their ability. You will be amazed in how people are following suit after you, right? And so now you're leading your coworkers, and you begin to be looked at as the pinnacle of employee at that company, right? And those efforts don't go unnoticed. I mean, it's the same across various different contexts. Whether you're a student like I was or an athlete like I was, if you're the person who shows up, does what they're supposed to do, and does it to the best of their ability, people take notice of that because most people don't do that. Most people fail to do even those simple things, right? So becoming a leader is more so about being a transformational leader. Now, if it's something where you just completely don't agree with what the company's doing at all, I can't really speak to that. You got to work, you know what I mean? Like, the Bible says a man who doesn't work doesn't eat. So I can't speak to, going against the boss and that sort of thing. But I will say that being a transformational leader, those are people you can put in any situation. They're just going to transform lives regardless in who they are and how they approach situations. It doesn't matter what the vision is that you put them under. They are really malleable. They're like chameleons. They can be in any environment and they blend in. I don't mean blend in the sense that they're not noticed, but they can fit into any environment and really bring life in it. Yep.
What is one self-awareness practice every leader should commit to consistently?
The understanding of the CAPS model. Understanding that model, I say, would be the first thing to understand. Then, this is good. I was told about a post that said that confidence is earned by a stack of undeniable proof that you are who you say you are. I think that quote is very interesting, but it's only partially true. Because what about before you have the proof? Oftentimes, it's almost like starting a business. Like, you need money to start the business, but you want the business to make you money. So where do you start if you have no money, right? Where do you start if you have no confidence, but you need accomplishments to build your confidence as a leader, right? Well, you got to start somewhere. So it really starts with an internalization, internal look at who am I as a person, focus on a specific self-construct. Employee, for example. How can I max out these traits within an employee and focus on those? That is going to build your confidence as an employee. You'd be surprised how those end up bleeding over into who you are as a son, into who you are as a brother, into who you are as a husband, as a father, so forth, so on, as an athlete. And those things those methodical practices begin to be things that you apply in all areas of life. If you were the person who showed up early for work every day, you might be the person who shows up early for practice. You might also be the person who shows up early to pick up their kid. You might be the person who carves out time to spend time with their family, right? So forth and so on. So if you're really starting from ground zero and you want something to focus on every single day, I would say focus on those self-constructs and building those self-aspects within situations that are not highly cognitively stressful. And thus, that's going to lead you towards building more experiences and building that stack of undeniable proof.
Okay, here's my question. This goes back to pluralism, where you said these are all of your selves. Mm-hmm. So with all of those selves, how are you your authentic self?
Great question. Let's to talk about that. Let's go to slide 14. I want to show that. Yes, exactly. So all of these, you have an authentic self of who you are, right? At baseline, you have core components that persist, right? We could say diligence is a core component. There are some people who are just very diligent, and that's one of their core components about themselves. Any task they put their hands to, they're going to be very diligent in it. You would probably find diligence in all of these different categories, right? These have the ability to be more nuanced, these self-constructs, because you might need certain traits for certain things. You might need to be very supportive as a husband, but you don't need to be very supportive as a public speaker. It might not be something that you're focused on. You might be focused on other traits, right? This all comes together in the sense that every situation that you go through in a day, you're wearing a different hat. You get off the phone with a daughter, and you're the mother right then, and then as soon as you hang up, I come to talk to you, and we have no familial relationship. You've immediately had to switch over to a different hat that you're wearing. And the brain does this subconsciously, right? So this idea of the self is really just multiple hats that we can wear in different situations, right? You're never wearing all of them at once. You're never wearing none of them at once. You always have at least one of them on, depending on the social setting, right? So it's the only qualm I have with looking at something like this and explaining it is it makes it seem like you're always operating as a different person, when in a sense, it's not that. You're really operating as yourself, right, within these social settings, but you do have to understand that there are different traits that you pull upon within these settings that direct your behavior in a certain way, right? Like even the way that you would speak to your child wouldn't be the same way that you would speak to a colleague or coworker. They would find it disrespectful if you did. So your ability to switch between that is automatic, right? This is really just about laying in front of you. We use the example of a car and an engine. This is an example of laying in front of you an engine so you can have some understanding of what this is like, right? And there was something I meant to mention about these self-constructs, and it's that many of these, they're either positive or negative. All of these, they're either positive or negative, but they're not neutral, right? So none of them can actually be neutral. The only ones that can be neutral are the ones that don't exist yet. And even those will automatically have some spillover from other self-constructs and how you would act, right? So for me, I don't have father or husband, so those things are neutral, but I could probably give you some of an idea of how I'd be as a husband or some of an idea of how I'd be as a father based on how I am as a manager, as a mentor, as a leader, right? That could give me some baseline idea of what that would be, right? So when we think about self-constructs, I wouldn't want you guys to take this back and think that you have to come up with all of your different self-constructs. It is a fun exercise to think about how many you can think of, but it's not going to be all-encompassing because there's going to be some version of yourself in a situation that you've not yet experienced, right? There's going to be some person that you talk to you've never spoken to before, some situation you're in, some country you're in, for example, maybe you're traveling, never been in a situation like that before. I've had plenty of those this past year, having traveled quite a bit, about to have one coming up. Never experienced this new country I'm going to, gonna be a situation I've never been in before, gonna have to mold one of these hats, wear it for this specific situation, and hope for the best outcome. Yep.
I got a question.
Yeah.
You covered a lot today. I know you have a very extensive library and all this stuff in the area of psychology and leadership. Is there, if possible, a book you can recommend that kind of encompasses a lot of this stuff for a read? You covered a lot of things. It'd be nice to kind of get into and just kind of study some of this stuff or as it applies to us.
Yeah, most definitely. So most of what I talk about and teach comes from academic studies, which I could recommend, but they're not very fun to read. It's so much academic jargon, there's so many referentials, there's so many immense, large words. You might just be better off reading a normal book, which I would recommend. I enjoy just a normal book. The Mountain is You is a book that I read a few years ago, packed with tons of psychological knowledge, tons. And it's very good for the person who doesn't care about getting into really the deep weeds about brain processes and neurochemicals and whatnot like I would. But it's very good if you just want to have the knowledge. You just want to learn, because it is based in psychology, and the writer, she's brilliant, very, very smart. So I recommend that book. That'd be the top recommendation. That pretty much encompasses most of what I said last week and this week. Atomic Habits is another really good book, very mainstream. I read that one this past year. Very good book. Yeah, I would highly recommend. All right. Well, thank you all for coming again.
So earlier, you mentioned anxiety, I think, to one of the responses, as one of the responses. So is it possible that for a new year, new mind, later in the year, we can get you here on dealing with those anxieties, those fears, everything that hinders us from the, I want to, but I can't kind of thing, or I shouldn't, or they won't accept me, all those kind of things. I don't know if you have things on that topic. Just because he's my son doesn't mean I actually know everything that's in his head. You follow me? So I'm asking this as, the pastor at Enlightened.
Yeah, most definitely. So, emotion psychology, I'm actually in the middle of a really good paper right now. I had to put it on pause because I was prepping for this. Really, really good paper on emotion psychology. It's just, there's so many different characterizations of emotions. Like we talked about anxiety, which is high arousal and high uncertainty. You also have high arousal and high certainty, which is excitement, right? So the difference between anxiety and excitement, that line is so very thin. So it really is just a matter of flipping your brain from being uncertain about the situation to being certain in some degree, right? And there are some situations where you can't be certain. You just don't know what the outcome is going to be. But focusing on things that you can be certain about will drastically reduce your anxiety. But yes, there is definitely precedent for a New Year, New Mind Part 2. I think it would be mid-year or quarter 2 year, early quarter 2 year, New Mind. But yes, most definitely. It's thank you for the topic. I'll be diving into emotion psychology next. Yeah. All right, so before we go, I have a very special guest, two very special guests who are here today, Ms. Hedges and Ms. Smith. These are two high school teachers of mine who were mentors that I kept in contact with over at Harrison High School. So I'm just, my heart is warm that they came. We have coffee almost every time I come back in town and just chat, catch up. So it's great to see them here. So yeah, awesome. Thank you for coming. Yeah, they also came. Yeah, they came to visit me in Boston when I was at Harvard. That was amazing too. So yeah. Okay, I'll just tell the story now. I took Ms. Hedges' class. It was honors chemistry. I was a sophomore when I took it. And I actually didn't want to take it. I was going to take on-level chemistry. And I'm pretty sure she convinced me to take honors chemistry, to stay in honors chemistry, I think it was. So I stayed in, ended up doing well in the class, and we developed a great relationship, talked about a lot of things. And she was always a very good, supportive person for me. And I was in her classroom when I got my first Ivy League offer, and I was from Columbia. And I was a student assistant to her, so I would help out with mixing chemicals in the back, not blowing stuff up, and storing chemicals in the freezer, and then just helping run copies and whatnot. It was just a nice period for me to have some downtime and just hang out, because I was dual enrolled, so I was taking college courses during the first half of the day and then coming to high school, mainly just for football, really. And I got my first Ivy League offer in her class, and I remember when I committed to Harvard, I was sitting in her class because I SPA'd again for her the following year, and I just said to her, do you really think that I can go? Do you really think that I can do it? You really think that I can go to Harvard? I didn't know anybody who had went. It wasn't even something I considered. I never went to high school and thought about, oh, I want to go to Harvard when I go to college. It never crossed my brain. And the opportunity just kind of came up. And she sat me down, she said, son, basically in short, she said, son, you can do it. And that was really all I needed to hear. It was like one of those moments where you think it's corny on TV where it's like, yeah, you can do it. And it's like just like the corny moment on the TV show. But for whatever reason, when she said it to me, I thought like, oh yeah, I can. I can just do it. You're right. And so she reduced the cold feet that I had and then ended up, the rest is history. So I'm just thankful that she's here and supporting. So please, another round of applause for her. I'm just...